Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for part one of our training series for NIMAC publishers and vendors. My name is Liz Schaller. I'm the NIMAC manager, and I'm joined today by Nicole Gaines, who is our NIMAC project director. And today we'll be covering kind of the basics of the NIMAC and our operations, as well as the nuts and bolts of submitting files to the NIMAC. And the way that this hour is structured, we're going to walk through a PowerPoint and then also do a live demo where we'll show you some of the things that we talk about in the PowerPoint. Alexa Miller is also with us today, our NIMAC librarian. She's going to keep an eye on the chat for us. So if you do have questions throughout, feel free to post them there and she will relay them to us or answer them herself in the chat. Like I mentioned, today's webinar is structured in two parts. The first part is a PowerPoint where we'll walk through some background information, some of the basics of validating your files and submitting them to us, as well as our process for certifying those files. And then in part two, we'll go into a live demo and show you some of the things, account features in the system that we talk about in part one. I wanted to mention again, this is part one of a two-part series. So part two of this series really talks about creating NIMAC files, the resources that we have available to you to support that work, as well as best practices for file tagging. And we will also be offering that webinar at two different times, one on Tuesday, July 30th at 9 a.m. and then Wednesday, July 31st at 2 p.m. That was included in the invite for this part one series, but I'll also be sending that out again as a reminder here in a little bit. All right, so let's get into some basics of the NIMAC. The NIMAC, or National Instructional Materials Access Center, was created by IDEA 2004, and we serve as the national source file repository for K-12 textbooks and core instructional materials. We make NIMAC files, and we'll talk about what that means, available to states for use in producing any accessible format, such as Braille, for qualifying students in K-12. One really important thing to note is that the files in the NIMAC are not distributed directly to students. And we'll talk a little more later about what that means and how you can support your customers when they reach out to you for accessibility requests. The NIMAC has been in continuous operation since it opened in December of 2006, and states and districts have been able to require NIMAC in their instructional materials contracts since July of 2006. To date, we have received over 78,000 file sets from 190 publishers, and over 54,000 files have been downloaded for use in producing accessible formats for students with disabilities. IDEA does not require that states work with the NIMAC, but we are pleased to say that all 50 states, as well as the eligible territories and the Department of Defense, do all coordinate with the NIMAC. The states and districts that coordinate with the NIMAC are legally obligated to require NIMAC from publishers in their textbook adoption contracts and abide by the eligibility requirements of IDEA, as well as copyright law in the use of NIMAC files. States are also required to designate and manage a small number of authorized users who have full access to the repository. Access to the NIMAC is quite centralized. So at each SEA or state education agency, they designate a NIMAC state coordinator. And this individual is responsible for identifying and managing the state's authorized users. This is typically 4 to 6 individuals per state. They often work at a school for the blind or maybe an instructional resource center, and they receive a login credential that allows them full access to the repository to download any files. Authorized users can also assign files for download to registered accessible media producers who are working on behalf of the state. So accessible media producers do also have accounts with the NIMAC, folks who are producing Braille and large print, but they can only access the files that have been assigned to them by the authorized user. IDA 2004 also defines the eligibility requirements for receiving materials that are produced from NIMAC. These materials can only go to elementary and secondary school students who have a qualifying disability per the eligibility guidelines of the National Library Service, as well as an IEP. And the NIMAC is not involved in determining eligibility for individual students. That is typically something that the authorized user or the entity that they represent is responsible for. The NIMAC specification stands for its National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard, and it is an XML-based source file format that is based on the DAISY standard, and it's designed for use in producing any accessible format, including Braille, DAISY, EPUB, large print, and audio. Again, NIMAC is not intended for distribution directly to students. It does need to be converted into an accessible format before it is given to a student. And NIMAC is the only format that we can receive in the NIMAC. I did want to make a special note here that since NIMAC is defined in the IDEA 2004 regulations, it can only be updated through legislative or regulatory action. And in 2023, we received a supplemental award from OSEP to explore possible updates to the specification. The spec actually hasn't been updated since IDEA 2004 went into effect. And so we have engaged in a number of activities this year, including an in-person stakeholder convening that several publishers participated in earlier this summer. And we've been gathering input on some areas of updates that we've identified based on feedback that we've received from users, such as updates to like requiring alt text or requiring MathML, both of which are currently optional for NIMAC. And all of the information gathering that we've done, we're currently kind of compiling that, reviewing it, and we will be writing a report that will be delivered to the Department of Education that could lead to a formal regulatory process for updating the NIMAC standard. And we will keep everyone updated on that as we move forward with the report. So under IDEA, there is a definition for materials that are within scope for the NIMAC, and this includes printed textbooks and related printed core materials that are written and published primarily for use in elementary school and secondary school instruction, and required by a state education agency or local education agency for use by students in the classroom. Now, the Department of Education nor the NIMAC impose a definition of core. That's something that is determined by the state or district. But the NIMAC does accept a range of student-facing materials, and these include textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers, as well as some ancillary materials. There are also materials that are considered outside of scope for the NIMAC, and these would include trade books like novels, college textbooks, reference books, those materials that are published pre-NIMAC or before 2006, as well as teachers' editions of textbooks and ancillaries that are for the exclusive use of the teacher. NIMAC files can be used to produce accessible formats only on behalf of students, not on behalf of teachers. We did also want to mention the notice of interpretation regarding digital materials in the NIMAC. So in May of 2020, the Department of Education published a notice of interpretation clarifying that IDEA does permit the NIMAC to accept NIMAC files for digital instructional materials, so long as those materials can be supplied in valid NIMAC format. Now, we know that really only a subset of digital instructional materials are appropriate to be submitted to the NIMAC, and those would be materials that are composed primarily of static text and static images. They would have a linear reading order, have minimal or no interactivity, and very little audiovisual content. So digital products that are highly interactive or contain significant audiovisual content like games and software cannot be converted into the NIMAC format. The notice of interpretation also states that digital instructional materials that meet the WCAG 2.0 AA accessibility criteria are exempt from NIMAS. We do have an FAQ on our website for regarding digital materials, and we also encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. This can be a complex area, both to determine what to submit to the NIMAC as well as how to convert some of those materials into NIMAS. So we are very happy to provide you more technical assistance on that as needed. States and districts that coordinate with the NIMAC are legally obligated to require NIMAS in their instructional materials contracts. However, we do know that with over 13,000 school districts in the US, that this does not always happen. And so there are times when we will reach out to publishers to request a file when there's a need to produce Braille or another accessible format for an eligible student. And we just want to note that we're very appreciative of publishers' assistance and support for students when they receive these requests. Alexa Miller, who's on our call today, she tends to handle those requests that we receive from our users. So you've probably worked with her before on that if you've ever received a request from us. And just a side note, that NIMAS files, again, are only used in the first production of an accessible format. So once that format is produced, like a Braille or a large print, it can be reproduced as needed to serve additional qualifying students. And this is important if you are part of like the customer service or customer support team for your publisher, that if you receive an inquiry regarding an accessible format from a customer, we recommend that you send them to the LUI database of accessible materials. And I think Alex will put that link in the chat. This is a directory that lists the accessible formats that have already been produced. And so your customer can go there, search by ISBN, and see if the material they're looking for has already been produced in Braille before pursuing the first time production of that material if it hasn't already been produced. And we are also always happy to assist your customers in locating materials. If you do receive these questions, please feel free to send them our way and we can assist with that. Now, that was a lot of information. So before we move on, and I'm going to hand it over to Nicole, did we have any questions about any of that?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I think we're good to go.
Great. Okay, well then I'll hand it over to Nicole.
Great, thanks, Liz. So now we're going to talk about the capabilities of your publisher account and the file submission process. So basically, in terms of publisher accounts, a primary feature or function is for you to be able to manage your inventory and upload files to your inventory. Publisher accounts are free, and you also have the ability to create as many sub-user accounts as you need for other folks at your company or for your conversion vendors. The publisher accounts basically will allow you, excuse me, to manually upload new inventory to the NIMAC. Technically speaking, the system can support files up to 300 megabytes. We generally recommend 250 be your limit simply because larger files do take longer to upload, and it can just be a little less efficient if you get above the 250 mark. You can also use your account to manually replace inventory if you have a file that has been uploaded, but there is a content issue or some kind of major tagging issue, and it needs to be replaced by your conversion vendor or someone at your company. You can do that through the system. You can also search, view, and download your own inventory, and you can export inventory reports. Some other functions and options that you have is you can, as I mentioned just a moment ago, create additional users for your account. You can also find the NIMAC validation wizard. available in your account, and you can also download the Excel to OPF metadata template. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And what that tool can allow you to do is to generate correctly formatted OPF metadata using an Excel sheet. It's an optional tool, and I'll show you where that is later during the demo. And again, you can also export, in addition to exporting inventory reports, you can also export a report of the user downloads for your materials if you have an interest in that information. So now we're going to talk about the file submission process, and we're going to start talking with the validation piece, and then I'll talk about the file submission options. So the NIMAC has always provided a free validation wizard that is available to all publishers and conversion vendors. In early 2022, we actually released a new version of the validation wizard, and this replaced the prior validation wizard. So if you've been with the NIMAC for a long time and you have that older version, we do encourage you to replace it with the new version. This is an improved tool, and it has a new level of checks and validation beyond DTD validation. It incorporates some checks that are exclusive to the NIMAC file format. For example, it will check to ensure that there are no extraneous files in your zip archive. It will also check to ensure that the file naming convention is in accordance with the NIMAC policies. And so this is very important for vendors and publishers to use, because that new level of file validation has also been implemented in the online system. So if you don't use the new validation wizard, you may miss issues that are going to prevent the files from successfully uploading either through the system or through the batch delivery process. So it's really important, again, to validate all files before you submit them, because they will be rejected for upload by the system, whether that is through a manual upload process or through the batch delivery process. So some of the checks, in addition to the things that I mentioned just a moment ago, the NIMAC validation wizard ensures that the XML is well formed, that the referenced images are present, and that the file validates to the NIMAC DTD, as well as the MathML DTD if MathML is present in the file. It also does provide feedback related to missing or invalid OPF metadata. Not all metadata issues can be detected by the validation tool, but a lot of them can be. And it can also detect some XML tagging issues and provide best practices feedback for some other issues. So again, the Mac Validation Wizard is available in your account and can be downloaded at any time in Windows or Mac versions. You can download it as many times as you like. And if you happen to be in a situation where you are a newer publisher and you do not yet have an active account, we are also happy to provide that Validation Wizard installer to you. Just get in touch with us directly for that. Once you have the tool installed on your machine, it's really intuitive and quick to use. You just navigate to the location of the zipped NIMAC file and then click the Validate button. And we'll walk through some screenshots in just a moment to show you what that looks like. When the validation is completed, the results will display on the screen. And if they are extensive or you just want to capture the information, you can also export the validation results as a CSV file. So what we see here, this is a screen capture of what the validation tool looks like when you open it on your machine. It has a browse button and a window that shows you where you have navigated to, and then a blue button to validate. So very simple interface for doing the validation itself. On the next screen, what we see is a little green bar. This little bar will move back and forth as the validation is happening. If you have a smaller file, you may not even see this. It may happen very, very quickly. Larger files will take a few moments longer to validate, and you will see that, that green bar as that is progressing. And so this final screen, this is showing us a successful validation. This happens to be a file that had no no issues whatsoever. And this is what you're hoping for. And once you get this message, you know that you're good to go to submit that file. So when you run the validation wizard, there are 3 possible types of validation output. The first type is an error. These are actual problems that have to be corrected, or the file will not be accepted by the NIMAC system. So these are issues that you definitely want to pay attention to. The second category is warnings. These are issues that are a little more concerning than a best practices issue. Correction or review is recommended, but not necessarily required for upload. I'll give you an example of that. Virtually all, but not all, of the files that we receive have pagination because they are from printed materials. And so if you, for example, do not have page numbering tags in your XML, that will generate a warning because just to kind of let you know if that was an accident or there are page numbers in the material, that is something that we will notice in the manual review. We'll talk a little bit more about the file certification process later, but that would be something that we would want you to have a heads up about. It will not prevent the file from uploading, however. And then the third category is just best practice. One example of that is that, for example, if you do not have alt text, you may get a notice that says, hey, there's no alt text in this. You may want to consider including alt text in future files. So the screen that we're seeing here, this is actually a fairly alarming file. It has many errors and warnings and other output. And so we actually created this problematic file on purpose just to show how the errors, warnings, and best practices output will display. And the main thing is that you will get the information at the top of the screen regarding just kind of a summary. In this case, 4 errors, 2 warnings, 2 best practices notices. And then in terms of the relative importance, again, the nice thing is that if you see over on the left, that very first column, the errors will always show up first. So you will be able to really zero in on what is most important there, what you absolutely have to look at. As you go to the right through the information, it's going to tell you the type of issue, the rule, and then generally it's going to tell you the specific issue that needs to be resolved. Often it will tell you where in the file that problem is also found. And so if you ever have any questions about this, we really kind of strived when we were revising this to ensure that the output was understandable and complete. But if you ever have a question about, what does this output really mean, please feel free to reach out and we're happy to help with that. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of file validation and issues with files that can come up is occasionally we will have issues where a batch delivery will come in and one or more of the files will be corrupt, and so they will not be able to be uploaded. And so one of the recommendations that our system vendor asks us to share with publishers and conversion vendors is that once you've zipped your file, it's a really good idea to just click on the file again and make sure that it'll reopen. Generally, if that is successful, then there's not a problem with the file being corrupt and you shouldn't have any issues. And so that's just kind of a very quick, easy check that you can do to help ensure that you do not have a corrupt zip file issue. Okay, so moving on to part 2, we're going to talk about file delivery. And as we mentioned before, one of the primary functions of the publisher account is to be able to manually upload inventory to your account. Again, files that are 250 megabytes or so can be manually uploaded. This is an individual process. They are uploaded one by one. A lot of times if folks have many files, they prefer to deliver by FTP, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. Whenever you log into your account, whether you're a publisher or a conversion vendor, your inventory page will always be your landing page. And from that page, there are actually 2 options that you can find for manually uploading files. The first one is the Add Inventory button. And this is what is used to upload a file that has not been previously submitted. In other words, this is an ISBN that's not already in your inventory, and you are uploading it for the first time. Should you need to replace a zip file, the way that you're going to do that is to use the Replace Zip File button that is associated with the specific file. So in other words, if that file has been uploaded, that ISBN is already in the system, you can search for that, scroll through your inventory, locate that specific record, and that's where you would replace that file. So this is a screen capture from a landing page for a publisher account, and those two options are circled. At the top of the page, we see that Add New Content link. That's where you go to add a new file. And then further down the screen, you'll see that there's a search result there all about coyotes. And over to the right, among the options that you have for that item that is already in inventory is Replace Zip File. So what happens when you manually upload the file? This is actually the same process that happens whether you are using the add new inventory or replace zip. But the first thing that happens is that automated validation. So that's going to happen first. And if the file fails validation, the system, similarly to the validation wizard, will display those errors on the screen. If you ever come across an issue, it's not common, but every now and then there may be a file that will indicate that there's a problem with the upload. Sometimes there are some issues with files that are not detectable by the validation, but they will cause the upload to fail. And so just let us know if you encounter an issue like that. We're happy to troubleshoot. Once the file passes validation, the next step is that the system goes to your OPF for your file, and it extracts that metadata to create a system record. The thing that's really kind of helpful about that is that it will also open that system record in edit mode automatically so that you can review it. And if you have any final changes or tweaks that you want to make to that record before you save it, you can do so at that time. The other thing that's kind of nice about the way that the system works is that if you do make a change, say there was some metadata that was missing, author, editor, you add that in, the system will automatically save that to your OPF. So you also get that change made to the file set itself. The other thing is that when a file is saved, it will appear immediately in your uncertified inventory. So that's kind of an indication to you right away that, hey, this was successful. There it is. I can see it. And this will also automatically place it in the file review queue. So manual upload versus batch delivery. So batch delivery, again, that's our second option for delivering files to the NIMAC. And one of the issues, again, with a manual upload, well, for one thing, it is one at a time, right? So if you have a lot of files, the batch delivery may just be better. And then there's also just the file size. The larger the file, the upload time is going to be slower. And so we do kind of recommend 250 megabytes as your max for uploading through the portal. There is no minimum or maximum size for submitting files by FTP, so if that is more convenient, you're welcome to do that for all of your files or any of your files. And there's also no minimum or maximum number of files, even if you just have one file that you want to deliver, but it's easier for you to use the FTP, you're welcome to do that. So let's talk a little bit about that batch delivery process. Basically, in order to deliver files by FTP, these are files that are delivered directly to Overdrive, who is our system vendor, and they use the SFTP process in order to receive those files. And the most important piece here is that in addition to your NIMAC login and password that allow you to access your account in the NIMAC system, you will need to request an FTP login at Overdrive. So that host location, it's actually at Overdrive. And if you do not yet have an FTP login, you can request one by emailing NIMAC support at Overdrive. So when you request your FTP access, one of the things that's important is that you do have to have a NIMAC account in order to make that request. And the important piece there is that when Overdrive is creating that FTP account, they are actually using the email address associated with your NIMAC login to create that. And we'll talk more in a moment about the batch reports and the importance of having an updated email address in order to receive those. But that NIMAC login is going to be important. And later on, I'll kind of show everybody where you can go to add additional accounts. If you're a publisher, you will need to create a NIMAC sub-user account for each conversion vendor that you're going to be working with who will need to upload files on your behalf, whether that's manually or through the FTP process. And if you're a vendor, you will have a separate NIMAC account and separate FTP login for each publisher with whom you work. The most important thing about using the FTP, and this may be a little different from experiences that you've had using FTP in other contexts, is that for the automated batch processing, it is really important that files be delivered directly to the root directory of the FTP. What does this mean? This simply means that you cannot use folders or subfolders, any kind of folder structure on your Overdrive FTP. You need to just drag those files directly in without using folders. The reason for this is that the batch process is not able to find files that are in folders. So they're basically hidden from that automated process. It's not going to be able to capture those. And the other piece of that is because it's not going to even know that they're there. They're not going to show up on your batch report, and we will not know that they were not processed. You will not know that they were processed. So you just want to make sure that you put them there on the root directory. If you need any further assistance or have any questions, just let us know. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Liz. She's going to tell you a little about the batch delivery report.
Thanks, Nicole. Do we have any questions about anything that Nicole just covered? Are we good to keep going?
There is nothing in the chat, so I think you're good to keep going.
Okay, great. Well, if anyone does have any questions, like we said, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll also have some time at the end as well. So the batch delivery report is a really important component of the FTP delivery. The FTP deliveries are processed overnight. And so the next morning, you'll receive an automated report that details the results of that processing. And this report is going to go to the email address associated with the FTP login. So as Nicole just mentioned, that would be the email address that's associated with that NIMAC login for that publisher or that sub-user, vendor sub-user. If you're a vendor that supplies files for multiple publishers, you are going to receive a separate report for each publisher. And one really important side note, we know that spam filters have gotten fairly aggressive. And so if you're delivering files by FTP and you're not seeing that automated email the following morning in your inbox, do check your spam or junk folder. You may also need to whitelist the automated Overdrive email, which is noreply-nimac@overdrive.com, or just the domain overdrive.com in order to successfully receive those batch delivery reports. Please be sure to review all the reports you receive. The NIMAC does also receive a report after the processing as well. So if there is an issue and we haven't seen the file resubmitted, we may reach out to you, but do please review your reports. Your daily report is your only notification of an FTP delivery failure. And again, to note, if your contact email address changes, either the domain changes or maybe there's a different vendor working on your account or they leave that company, Overdrive is going to need to either update the email address associated with the FTP login or create a new login. Otherwise, you're not going to receive those delivery reports. So please reach out to us at the NIMAC if you have any questions or you need any assistance with getting that change made. The next few slides are going to show some screenshots of the report. And so at the top of the report, you'll see a summary of the upload results. If the report shows no failed uploads, then you don't need to take any further action. If the report does show failed uploads, please review the details column, correct that issue, and deliver the file again. So on this screen here, you'll show a report with all the uploads successful. At the top left, it notes that there were successfully processed new titles as well as successfully processed resubmitted titles. And then if you look to the right of your screen, there's a results column for each individual file showing success. So that's what you want to see. On this screen here, we have a report that includes a failed upload. So again, at the top left, you'll see the status of all of the uploads, and there's a failed to process new title listed there. So when you look down at each individual title in the results column, there's one listed as a failure to upload. And then beside that, you have details. In this case, it shows that there was an error in the XML file with the doc author tag. And it actually notes that that previous error stopped the validation process so that there may be additional errors in the file. So it should outline what needs to be corrected in order for you to successfully resubmit the file. If a delivery fails, you should, in the details column, have that information related to the error. I will say occasionally there are errors that state that you should reach out to us directly for more assistance on whatever caused the error. So please do so if you do see that particular information show up in your error report. Again, the daily report is your official notification regarding failed uploads. And if you have any questions at all about any errors, please just don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll be glad to help. Once you have corrected and resubmitted the file, there's nothing that you need to provide in terms of notifying Overdrive or us about that. Just deliver the file again by FTP. And that new delivery will show up on the daily report on the following day. And that will allow you to verify whether or not the corrected file uploaded successfully. If a file has already been certified, the system will prevent a user from overwriting the zipped file. This is very important when you may be resubmitting a file with a new printing, or maybe you added alt text or did some minor corrections to the file. If you're in that situation and you need to replace a file that's already certified in the system, reach out to us via email. Let us know the ISBN or ISBNs of the files that you're resubmitting. And what we'll do is we'll go into the system and move the file into stalled status from certified status, and that will allow you to go ahead and resubmit the file. And now I'll touch a little on file review and certification before I turn it back over to Nicole to demo some of these system features for you. Newly uploaded files appear in the uncertified inventory, and they're automatically placed in the file review queue. This is actually also true for files that have been previously certified and resubmitted. Those also show up in the uncertified inventory queue as well. Files are generally reviewed in the order that we receive them, but we are happy to expedite files when there's an immediate need. So as a publisher, if you have a deadline for certification, please let us know as soon as you know, or even at the point of file submission, so that we can prioritize that file or files. In order to be accepted into the NIMAC, the files must pass automated validation when they're uploaded, as well as a manual review by NIMAC staff. And we'll talk in our part 2 series about really more about creating NIMAC files and best practices, some of the things that we look for when we do our manual review of the files. When files are certified, they move into your certified inventory, and the super user receives an automated email with the digital certificate number. Some of your customers may request that certificate number to be provided to them to ensure that all of your materials were submitted to the NIMAC that are part of their contract. You can also add additional email addresses, up to 3, in your account that can receive these emails. And you can let us know if there are additional email addresses that you'd like to receive that email. I do also want to note that these certificate numbers are available in the individual system records for the individual files when you're logged into the system, as well as in your inventory report. So you can export your inventory to a CSV file when you're in your account, and that certificate number will show up in that spreadsheet, and you'll be able to find it there as well. In terms of file review checks, we do review the metadata submitted with the file to ensure that it's correct and complete. We compare that to the PDF that's included in the NIMAC file set, as well as the XML file. We also do some additional tagging checks in the XML file, such as checking the pagination tagging, and as well as tagging of the table of contents and glossary and some of the other common content to make sure that those are structured correctly. If there is alt text in your file, we will also do a spot check for quality of that. But one thing we do want to note is that we do not receive the print books for the files that are submitted to us. So we don't do a page-by-page comparison to evaluate the tagging in the XML. Our staff can make minor metadata corrections in the system at the point of file review, and we do that routinely, and that would not require the files to be resubmitted. However, there are XML corrections that we have to request from time to time, or other file issues that may require the vendor to make corrections and resubmit the file to us. When a file requires correction before certification, staff will send a detailed feedback email to the individual that uploaded the file, and then that file will be placed in the stalled inventory in the system while it awaits corrections. The time from file delivery to when it is reviewed and certified varies quite a bit depending on the number of files we've received at any given time, how many are currently in the queue. When submissions are pretty light, a file might be certified the day it's uploaded to the system. However, when we're busier, and our busier times do tend to be in the spring and summer, if there's a large delivery of files or we've received many batches of files from many publishers, it may take 2 weeks or longer for us to review your files. Again, I just want to note that if you do have an upcoming contract deadline with a customer, please notify us via email so that we know to expedite your files for review. We can prioritize those in the review queue. We are not looped on any contracts that you might have with the state or district. And so we generally only know about a file submission deadline if you relay that information to us. Otherwise, we don't know, and it's that kind of first in, first out approach to file review. We encourage publishers to submit files to us at least 2 weeks in advance of a deadline. Again, that gives us that cushion if it's a busy time, as well as helps ensure that if there are any issues with the file, your vendor will have time to make the corrections needed and resubmit that file to us. Files, again, are usually certified in the order received, but we can prioritize files to help a publisher meet a deadline. And here we have a screenshot of our NIMAC homepage. Our website is structured by our users. So you'll notice across the top of the screen, our menu includes a tab for publishers and conversion houses. And there you'll find a bunch of resources, many of which we'll talk about in our part 2 series. But we do post our trainings, like the training today, to that section of our website as well. So I will send that link out to you all as soon as it is available. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nicole to go through a live demo if there aren't any questions about anything that I've just covered.
No, we are still good to go.
Perfect. Okay, I'll stop sharing my
All
screen.
right. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. So as Liz mentioned, we are going to go now into a publisher account and take a look at a few of the things that we discussed. And so in terms of what we're going to do, we're going to kind of just walk through a little bit of the functionality. If anybody has a specific question or would like additional detail about anything, let me know. I'm happy to spend a little additional time or go in a different direction if there's any special request. What I definitely want to cover is just how to do that, adding new content, how to go through that process, how to add a new user, and then I want to talk a little bit about working with your inventory or looking through your inventory and exporting, creating reports on the fly. So with that, I just want to kind of remark that, again, when you log into your account, you're always going to land at your inventory. And in terms of a basic navigation of the site, if you were to go to a different part of the system, if you were to go into resources or if you go into add new content and you want to return to this screen, the way that you can do that, you can either do a search by going to the search box, or you can always just click the logo in the upper left-hand corner. That will always take you back to your landing page. That's just kind of a helpful way to orient yourself to the screen. When you are on this page, one of the things that may be interesting to you is to know that the search functionality that you have is the same as the functionality of our users. And so this includes the ability to search your own inventory by title, creator, or ISBN. And you also have a range of different filters over to the left. You can apply these filters, either one filter or multiple filters, either before you do a search or after you do a search. Another option is you can actually page through your inventory. And there are different ways that you can sort the inventory. If you are a publisher that has quite a few files, that's probably not going to be your preferred way to locate files, but it is an option that you have. So the next thing that I want to point out is just that most of the features of the system are found in the upper right-hand corner. So this is where your user information is. We're going to talk a little more in a second about adding sub-users or managing those. That's where you find that. If you were to download your own inventory, those download requests are going to show up in My Downloads, which is also up here to the upper right. And then there are 4 other options below the search box that add new content. And then this is also where you will find that Transform Excel to OPF optional system tool, the Resources tab, and then also the place where you can generate a report of user downloads of your materials. So while we're in this part, I do want to take a little side trip here. Under Resources, this is, as I mentioned earlier, you are able to download the validation wizard at any time. This is the screen where you find that. This is also where you find the metadata template if you were to be interested in using that Excel to OPF metadata tool in the system. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the user information. You can go and view the information for your account or change your password from this screen. If you actually want to update your information, however, we ask that you contact us to make those updates for your primary contact or to make those kinds of changes. We're happy to help with that. But this is also where you go to My Sub-Users to add additional users either at your company or for your conversion vendors. When you go into My Sub-Users, you will see any users that you've already created. Those users can be edited or deleted from this screen. We do encourage you to take a look at your sub-users at least once a year to see if there are any that you don't really need to have in there anymore. Go ahead and delete those. Just do a little housekeeping. When you go to add a new user, you just click the Add User button. And this is a very simple process. All you need is the name of the person, their email address, and then you choose what role you want them to have. And so in terms of facilitating publishers' use of the system, we do have 2 possible roles for your sub-users. One of them is going to be the publisher role, and that basically provides the same functionality to your sub-user that the primary user or super user has. The vendor role, on the other hand, has more limited functionality. It has all of the capabilities needed to add inventory and manage inventory, but it has 3 options that are available to the publisher that are not available to the vendor. The first one is that it cannot create additional accounts. You generally are not going to need your conversion vendors to have that functionality. They also will not be able to download your inventory. That's generally not something that a vendor is going to need. And then the third is that they're not able to generate that user downloads report. So that's the difference there. When you fill in the name and email address and select a user role, you just click Save Changes, and the system will automatically email the login ID and the password to the user immediately. And so, again, as we talked about before, email filters have become much, much more aggressive. And so we would just say if the user has not received those automated emails, they may want to check their junk. They may want to look at their spam filter to see if there's an issue there. So that's basically all there is to the process of adding additional users. Again, there's no limit to the number of users that you can add. You can have as many as you need for your work. So the next thing I want to jump down to is the adding of new content. As we mentioned before, the actual process, whether you're adding a new file or resubmitting a file, it's the basic same process. And it's going to take you to a pretty simple screen where you navigate and choose the file that you want to upload, wherever that is on your machine, and then you just click the upload button. So very, very simple and straightforward. I will note that if you have a larger file, that initial file validation step will take a little bit longer. So that's just something to be expected. This file is not super large, and so it should, oh, now this is very interesting. This is very interesting indeed. I had thought that I had already deleted this. So you have the opportunity here to see this is what's going to happen if you try to use add new content and the file is already in your account. So what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to this instead, and choose replace zip file. So same steps here. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to give you an opportunity to review the metadata that is associated with the file. And you don't, you may not have changes that you want to make, but you do have the opportunity to make any changes if you'd like to. The one thing that I do want to point out about this screen is that when it extracts the metadata, you may occasionally see that under publisher, your publisher has not extracted. If this happens to you, this simply means that you have an imprint in your OPF that is not yet associated with your account. We actually, as a kind of a safety feature in the NIMAC, we have a system whereby we associate your imprints with your account. This is just a matter of helping to prevent the accidental upload of inventory to the wrong account. This is something that with conversion vendors who may work with a large number of different companies, this is just a way of helping to prevent those accidents from happening. So what does this mean? If you come across this, what we would ask you to do is please don't select an incorrect imprint. What you'll actually see is you will see a list of all of the imprints that are associated with your account. If you need to add one, please just cancel out. We know it's a minor inconvenience if you have to cancel out and wait a few minutes, but if you can just cancel out, send us an email and let us know, hey, please go in and add this imprint to our account. We can generally do that very quickly for you so that you can select the correct imprint for the material. And again, as we scroll down, we can see the complete metadata for the file. And then when we save the changes, they will be saved to the record. That record will be updated. The OPF will be updated. And as we mentioned earlier, whether your file is a resubmission or whether it's a new inventory item, those will automatically move into the review queue. They will automatically move into your uncertified inventory. So the last thing that I want to highlight is just that as a publisher user, you have the ability to view your inventory and create reports on the fly anytime that you like. I mentioned earlier that you have a range of filters over to the left, and there is actually one filter that you have that the other NIMAC users do not have, and that is the status of your inventory. The NIMAC users, they only see your certified inventory, but you can actually go under status and see your uncertified, stalled, and certified inventory. In this case, it's a test account. There's actually nothing in that certified status, but you can go in and apply one of these filters if you are interested in exporting a report, for example, of your uncertified inventory. The way that you can do that at any time is there is an export button over to the right. It is below the sort by options. And this is not, it's not 100% intuitive because you might think, oh, export, this is where I can export a file. It's actually not to export a file. It's to export a report in CSV format of whatever you are displaying. If you log in and just from your landing page hit export, that will give you an export, a report of your entire inventory, but you can also hit that button at any point after you do a search or apply a filter if you want to get just a specific report of certain titles that are in your inventory. The other thing that I want to point out about that is that the digital certificate numbers that are, well, actually, we won't be able to see them here because we don't have certified files here, but for any inventory that you have in your certified inventory, those certificate numbers for your certified files will show up in the detailed record as at the bottom of the record, and they will also show up in any exported reports. So you have access and you can easily get to that information if that is ever useful to you. And so the other thing that I wanted to just mention in passing is that we talked earlier about the downloads, and you do have the ability, if you are a publisher user, not as a conversion vendor role, but if you have a publisher account, to add files to your inventory. One caveat with that, we always wanted to make it possible for publishers to access their own inventory. Occasionally, you may have a need to supply a NIMAC file to someone who does not meet those eligibility criteria that Liz talked about earlier. An example of that might be you might receive at some point a request from a teacher who needs an accessible format for material. Teachers cannot under IDEA, they're not eligible, but as a publisher, you always have the discretion to distribute files to other folks who may have a legitimate need, but don't meet those criteria. That is something that you can do. The caveat that we would say with that is just that if you actually need a file to repurpose it or to make changes to resubmit it, we would ask that you not use a downloaded file from your inventory. Those materials will be fingerprinted and watermarked. If you ever happen to need a file that is not fingerprinted and watermarked, we're happy to have Overdrive supply that to you directly. So, any questions about that? There is a question about what would the digital certificate number be used for. In some cases, publishers use that to verify that they have submitted files in accordance with contracts. It comes up sometimes, not all publishers use that, but it is there if you need it for that purpose. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to hand it back to Liz to wrap up, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicole. And if anyone thinks of any questions after the fact, please never hesitate to reach out to us. Our email is nimac@aph.org. Alexa just put in the chat a link to our exit survey. It's a very short survey, just a couple questions, and this is important for us as we create new trainings for our users as well as our reporting back to the Department of Education. So if you wouldn't mind, please taking just a minute to complete that survey, that would be great. We really appreciate it. And thanks again for being here. We hope you'll join us for part 2.